Hey, this is Steve with Dabble Lab, and this is another episode of Dabble with Experts. And today I am joined by Karthik Raghupathi, who was my previous coworker at Dabble Lab, who is now at Amazon evangelizing Alexa. And today we are talking about, what are we going to talk about today, Karthik?
Hey Steve, thanks for bringing me on this show. We are going to be talking today about designing for conversation, and kind of in the past few years, thanks to you and Amazon, I've got the chance to work with developers on their skills, and have had the chance to build some really great skills. I wanted to kind of bring all those learnings together and talk about how we can take our Alexa skills to the next level by designing for conversation.
Okay, great. So so we're going to be looking at somebody's got an idea and where they go next. Is that what you're thinking?
Exactly. Right from the moment that brilliant idea strikes you, what is the next step that you do, right? And sort of we've had this transition from say a screen based screen based dynamism to kind of like a voice based interfaces that we are talking these days, right? So uh, when when mobiles existed, or when phones, when computers existed, when they came onto the field, we started to build these web apps. When we had the idea, we would make a web app which would look like every other web app, or which would look like every other mobile app, right? But that necessarily does not have to be the case in voice, right? Voice is slightly different. Um, kind of from that first moment when you get an idea to your mind, how do you proceed forward? What can you do differently in that stage so that you can build a really compelling Alexa skill?
And so, so I'm really looking forward to diving into this. Are you, is this designed for technical people, designers? Who's this targeted at?
Well, I think the target audience is anyone who wants to build an Alexa skill or is interested in voice, the voice technology in general. Having said that, I'm not going to be talking about the technology specifics of this. I do have a workshop link upcoming in the slides, which everyone can take through to understand the fine-tuned technical in-depth sessions that we have on a tutorial. This is more or less for UX folks, or people, designers, VUI designers, or even developers who know the technical stuff, but they wanted to learn, want to see what they could do to their skills so that they offer a better customer experience.
Got it. So this is sounds like this is the starting point for anybody that's interested in building Alexa skills or making their existing skills a little bit better from a conversational perspective.
Exactly.
Awesome.
Do you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, perfect. What I'll be also doing is the companion course that I'm going to be talking about. All of this is something that interested viewers can go to this link, which is alexa.design/CDW, and follow along the course. This is like a full course that can be completed in an hour or two, and it has the appropriate code samples, and in-depth tech understanding of things, tech explanation of things about building an Alexa skill. Having said, here's the thing. I'm not sure if you learned about this in college, Steve, but the Shannon Weaver model. Are you familiar with the Shannon Weaver model?
I am familiar with it. Yes.
Right, and I think the Shannon Weaver model is kind of like the model that applies to our real life conversations as well, right? And so what basically Shannon Weaver model kind of does is it paints a very good picture of how communication happens, right? And there's usually an information source, and there's a destination where the message has to go through, right? And there's a transmitter in between, and sometimes there's a noise source, right? So like, say for example, I'm speaking to my mother, right? And usually when I'm talking to my mother, and let's say I call her up tonight and I say that, hey, I was talking to Steve, my mom would say something like, hey, did you have dinner? Right? Now, the reason why something like that is happening is because there's always this kind of a mismatch in our expectations. For my mother, my dietary habits are more of a priority than who I spoke to or what I worked on, right? Whereas for me, something else might be the priority. So when I'm speaking to her, there might be I might be saying something else, she might be saying something else, and there will be noise. And that is one thing that we at Amazon understood is, people converse automatically, and computers don't, right? Like you are speaking to me, I'm speaking to you. We can converse automatically, but that's not how computers do, right? And what we realized is for building a really good conversational skill, right? You have to keep in mind a couple of things that can make your Alexa skill more conversational. And that's just what I'll be talking about. But I always start with this whenever I speak to other developers. I start with a very simple question is, what do you think distinguishes conversation from simple communication? You want to take a stab at that, Steve?
Well, I feel like I'm being set up, but I'll take a stab. I think of a conversation as something that goes back and forth versus
Right.
like just a one-way communication, which is more of a command. Maybe there's a response to it, but it's not as back and forth. That's my guess.
Right. Yeah. So and I think that's a very good point, right? But more than that, there are more things that actually um, brings a conversation to life, right? And the way I think about it is, one of the things that you said is that we go back and forth, right? That is one of the ways to have a very good conversation. But another thing, if you think of people in your life who are close to you and the people who you like to talk to, uh, there there might be kind of like some important things that strikes familiarity with all these people. And one of the things is, there are those 4 points on the screen that you see. But the very first thing is construct meaning based on shared context, right? Now, when you propose for this call and I propose for this call, we are both on this call. We have kind of like a shared context, and we can kind of make a meaning about it. Pretty sure we are not on this call to talk about, say, how to build a mobile app or something else. We are talking about voice because that's a context that we share with each other, right? So we kind of have this meaning between you and me about what we kind of want to draw out of this entire conversation, right? And Another thing that kind of comes to my mind is to evolve the data sets upon which we work on, right? So I'm sure we have spoken so many times in the past few years now, right? Every time we speak, we get to know new things about each other, or we kind of get a life update, what's happening with each other, and that data set keeps on growing, right? That data set always keeps on growing. So the next time I come to talk to you, I ask about, hey, how was that thing that you were working on, or how is someone at your home? We kind of have these data sets that keep on increasing. And one thing is, you kind of have like an increased understanding of each other's intention, and this is very important. When we are speaking to our best friends or best conversational partners, we know the intention. We know sometimes when to listen and when to talk, when to give advice and when to stay silent, right? And that I've found, and because I got married recently, that I've found is a life-saving tool to have, right? Just to know when to shut up and when to speak, right?
That's a skill
And
you'll always be refining and
yeah, exactly, right. And talking of refining, that's where the last point comes in, where you sometimes remember a novel information beyond a given conversational session. Like, people know your likes, your dislikes, what you are allergic to. Not everyone knows about it, but the close conversational partners that come to you or are with you, they know something information about you beyond a given conversation session, right? So I think the difference between a good Alexa skill and a great Alexa skill is if a skill can do these four things and can pull it off in a great way, I think it has a scope to become a great Alexa skill, right? And that's primarily the entire intention about what I'm going to speak about is how do you take the ideas that you had in your mind and apply these four things that you learned from a human conversation and put it to your skill and make a great skill, right? So that's pretty much my idea here. And the way we kind of do this is we talk a bit about we try to build a skill when we kind of do these workshops. We try to build these skills. We ask everyone to come up with their own idea, and we have our own idea as well in our mind. And the idea that we sometimes go with is something that is very near and dear to my heart, eating food. And we kind of built a skill called as the foodie, which is a conversational skill for Alexa that helps connect hungry people with the right meal at the right time in the right place. So I think this is very important. The moment you kind of have an idea in your mind, it is very important to have an elevator pitch for your skill, right? If something that you could explain in like a few seconds, right? That is very important. So I think that is the very stepping stone for when you have that flash of brilliance idea that comes to your mind. You just say that, hey, this is what I'm building. So if someone asks you, hey, what are you building? You can say that, hey, this is what I'm building, right? And it should not be more than a sentence or two. That's how I talk about these kind of ideas. So so that's how we get started with everyone. We ask everyone for the elevator pitches, and on ground these activities are really fun because you just got like a huge group of people who come up with their own ideas and they try to put up a very tempting VC pitch. But yes, that's I believe how one should get started, right? So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And in the previous your previous bullet points, I really liked. I mean, it's I kind of boil it into. I like the way that you put it though. Like, what's the difference between a conversation and just communication? And conversations feel personal is sort of what I got because there's context. And you start thinking about that from a designing and building a skill. It encompasses a lot of thought and work.
Exactly, right? And what we then kind of do is we kind of take those 4 points and we litmus test. We ask everyone to litmus test your idea. So if you are a skill builder who has come up with a skill idea, you should first litmus test it. And I was listening to some of your previous Dabble with Expert sessions, and I think this goes around in the voice community in a lot sense that can I build this idea on top of voice, right? Not if I should I build this idea on top of voice, right? And not can I. I mean, technically, because it's a new platform, we see people always trying to push the limits of technology and trying to build some really cool stuff on top of it. But should you build it, right? And one really good example that comes to my mind is, couple of months back, we were working with one of the boutique owners who would kind of do online deliveries of flowers and cakes and stuff like that, right? Now that is a very visual experience. Trying to bring that onto voice requires a totally different way of thinking about it, right? So if you're not going to be making a great skill at the end of the day if you just say that, hey, this is how you book a flower on our website, right? Let's get all of that on voice and you can book the same thing on your Alexa skill and you can spend 15 steps doing that, right? The problem that people kind of sometimes don't realize that is voice is different than screens. Like on screen, I am willing to have more patience, right? But if I went into a florist shop and I told someone that I wanted red roses and they gave me a yellow rose, or they messed up my order, I would really be frustrated, right? I think that's one thing that people need to keep in mind about having a kind of an empathy for the user, and which brings me to kind of the idea of litmus testing it. So the skill that I was talking about, foodie, what it does is it provides hungry people with meal options, and it takes takes into account their dietary needs, logistical situation, and the time of the day. Now, when you kind of open the skill for the first time, it will ask you a question. This is kind of like a one-time thing, and it helps the user determine what you should eat, right? And the moment it kind of asks these questions, it also remembers these answers that the user is giving, right? So it can avoid asking them again and again. And over time, the skill learns about the user's preferences and habits and makes more accurate restaurant recommendations, right? And one of the things that is very important to this skill is at any point the user can say that, hey, I don't want to do all of these things. This is what I want to do, right? This is very important for us. So this is what our skill does. And if you look at it and we go back to those 4 points that we were talking about in the past, the very first thing is, does your skill solve a problem, right? That's kind of a litmus test which we keep. Is, I know at the end of the day, there are lots of cat fact skills that we keep seeing, and a lot of different those kind of things. As long as if you think it solves a problem, I think that is one idea that you should litmus test it, right? Are you doing something that solves someone's problems, right? And then is it conversational to talk about, right? Is it conversational to get started with, right? And by that, what I mean is, does it replicate the experience that you would find in a conversational partner? So, for example, if I went to, say, a restaurant ordering chain, or say, for example, a pizza shop, the person would ask me certain questions, right? What kind of pizza do you want? What are the toppings that you want? What kind of cheese do you want, right? I think this is something that the skill does as well. So it is conversational. I would say that, yes, this is kind of conversational. And does it remember some novel information beyond a certain conversational session, right? So, and this is very important, right? Say, for example, at the end of the day, we keep going to the same restaurant again and again, and we know that there is this one cafe that I often go to, and every time I go in there, I always order the same type of coffee, right? And it has gone to that point where the bartender is a good, where the the barista is a good friend of mine, right? And every time I come in, I don't have to tell them, and they just bring me the same order again and again, right? So if I could build a skill that could learn about the user's preferences and habits, so that the user doesn't have to kind of come back, keep saying that again and again, I think that makes for a good experience. And last but not the least, this is very important. At any point, the user should be in control of the conversation. Think of the skill as the person, who is. So this is like a transactional conversation that's happening, and at any point, the user should be able to say that, hey, you know what? I don't want all of those things. Just give me this, right? And that is something that you would find happening whenever you kind of do this at a shop as well, right? If they are asking a lot of questions, you would say that, hey, you know what? I'm really irritated by these questions. Just give me this. I don't want anything else, right? So yeah, I think when you kind of put these 4 things, which is it conversational? Does it remember something about your user? And does it make the conversation, does it allow the user to speed through conversations that is not needed and go directly achieve something, which could be like, for an advanced user kind of a scenario. And last but not the least, and the most important, does it solve a problem? So once you kind of do all those litmus testing, you will kind of get an idea that, hey, I think I've got a good idea in my mind, and they have like a really good outline of what their skill is going to do, right? And this is the kind of exercise we do as well when we start to build a skill, and we almost think about how it solves the user's problems, right? And which basically brings me to the same point that we discussed some time back, is that not every good not every idea that comes to you is good for conversation, right? And a lot of it comes down to how you implement this idea in the skill, right? Like the bouquet ordering stuff that I was talking about. I mean, at the end of the day, you could get all of those bouquet ordering. You can order flowers on an Alexa skill, but if it's going to take you 10 steps, why would a user want to go and use that on on their eco device rather than using, say, a mobile phone or to do something like that? So that is kind of like the biggest tenets of a conversational skill.
Yeah, I think that's great. There's on those points too. It's like you really have to check all of them, right? Because
Right.
you could have something that is like going to provide value, but maybe it's just not
Right.
as valuable as some other means of doing the same thing, like through a mobile app or something like that. So like one that I think of that came up with a project that I think we worked on a while ago, but the Lake Forest, where the main point of this skill was to answer questions, but it wasn't enough for it to just like answer FAQs, because FAQs somebody could just get from the website. It's the not so frequently asked questions that they've got to get more information to answer that become where
Right.
that's valuable. And yeah, I think it is important to not just say does it provide value, but does it provide more value than however they would do it without a skill?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. And one of the good skills that I recently saw, and I think about Ashish Jha as well. He built this skill with Reebok sneaker drop, um, and they built a skill called as Reebok. Basically, built a skill called as Reebok sneaker drop. And what it does is it just asks people to sign up on the skill and give them the requested permissions and all. And at a certain time on a certain day, they launch a sneaker draw, a sneaker for everyone to just buy. But one of those people who signed up becomes a lucky winner and gets their sneaker for free, right? So that is a really cool implementation of still selling your goods, but at the same time getting people to subscribe interest. I mean, they could have gone all the way and said, hey, you know what, we will let people orders to shoes via our skills, right? But a kind of like a value add was that, hey, sign up on this skill, and every day we choose a winner and you get a chance to win this. I mean, who wouldn't want to sign up for free sneakers, right?
Yeah.
And people did that, and that was like a very good mechanism for them to kind of promote their products, right? So I think that is very important.
Yeah, I think that also illustrates a good point, that it doesn't need to be either or. Like, it doesn't need to be like I'm going to have a skill instead of a website, or a website instead of a skill. They can work together, and they
Exactly.
don't have to be a clone of one another. You don't necessarily need to think of building a skill. Like we get this sometimes from, like, as we're talking to potential clients, they'll maybe start with, well, we have a mobile app and we want a skill that does the same thing the mobile app does. Well, do you need a skill if the
Right.
mobile app already does it? But maybe what you
Right.
can do is augment the mobile app with the skill. So something like what Ashish built, hey, you can sign up for these giveaways using the skill. And we are doing another one that I was sharing with you earlier, where the point of the skill is to provide discount codes that somebody could use in an e-commerce store. So it's an example of, we're not trying to duplicate the e-commerce store with the skill. we're trying to engage
Right.
users in a fun way. So they can use Alexa to answer a quiz question. It's kind of a fun quiz. And if they answer it right, they get a discount code that they can then use to check out in the e-commerce store to get a discount. And it just, it's using the strengths of both platforms together. I like this.
And that actually reminds me of a time when we kind of tried to do the same thing. What used to happen was we were doing these workshops and we would see people giving us feedback. But what would happen is in all those feedbacks, we would rarely have like many people filling up the feedback forms. And what we kind of did was we built all of that into an Alexa skill so that people could just give the feedback through their mobile app, the Alexa app. And we saw that like a lot of people were giving feedback for our workshops once we moved to the kind of the system where you can speak to a person and give a feedback, right?
Yeah.
So that's something. Those are kind of the ideas that push the horizon of voice computing, and at the same time, unique use cases that really makes customers want to come back to your ideas, right?
Yeah, I love it.
And yeah, and so once you kind of had the idea so the very first step was kind of have the elevator pitch ready. The second is kind of get the entire script out and do the litmus test. The next thing that I feel a lot of skill builders don't do is identifying the users, right? And identifying these users is very important in the sense that, hey, what are my users doing, right? And this is something which is like a standard part of all UX research studies that you do for mobile apps. So this is almost similar. But one thing in the voice domain that you would want to use is, will they be using a local lingo of any kind, right? If you kind of know that, hey, how does this person talk to everyone else, right? Um, in mobile apps, when you're doing this, the answer is pretty clear that, hey, I'm going to be building an iOS app, or I'm going to be building an Android app. And I know that iOS users are like this. I know that the Android users are like this. So this is how I could target them. And you kind of have an idea. But in voice, it's so different because I have a device at home. I have so many people accessing it. How do you kind of, determine who your user is? And that's where I think this last point is very important, is how do they kind of talk, right? So these are the 4 points that we kind of keep in mind. One is, what are these people like, right? We kind of give them a name, we put them in a time, in a place, and what is it that they want to do when they are using my skill, and when are they going to use it, right? What is the kind of time when they are going to use it, and will they be talking about how will they be talking, right? And the skill that we made, the foodie skill, say for example, we take a person, Sanjay, who is 22 years old, works for a software company, and he wants to get out of office for lunch, right? And this is something that I've faced because now that I've started going into an office, before all this situation, uh, every other day there used to be a party, and we were really strained for finding a place to eat outside, right? We would have to open up our app and we would have to see, hey, which restaurant do I try it out today? Ultimately, it went to that point where we kind of have this one person in our team who is a self-professed foodie, and we used to ask them for recommendation, right? And it would always go like, hey, where do we go for eating? And that person would say, hey, what do you want to eat? I say Chinese. Okay, let's go here, right? So and that's the kind of thing that people like to, if you could replicate that entire conversation onto a skill, that's something we attempted in this skill. So Sanjay wants to use the skill because he's tired of going to the same place again and again, and he wants a suggestion, right? And he's most likely to use this when he's at work and he's hungry, and Sanjay swears a lot, right? And now at the point is, the more you kind of understand your users and what they want, you would be able to design experiences that they will want to come back to, right? And this is very important because earlier I was involved with a skill um, which gives you animal sounds, right? And we found like that a huge corpus of our users were kids, and we kind of made those cartoon characters and asked the kids for had it picture rich and had some really good sounds in there. So I think that determines a lot. If you kind of understand who your users are, you can really design an experience that they will want to come back to. So yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that everyone should do. We kind of get everyone in the same room and we say that, hey, okay, now you've had your idea, now you have to identify your users, and everything that you know about your users or whoever is in your target user range, right? I think if you kind of write it down, that helps as we go ahead and as we build the skill to even faster things. Now, to a lot of people, at specifically around this point is when they kind of start, at the starting, they start to question that, hey, I just learned something cool and I want to get into the semantics of building it out. Maybe I want to use my no code tool editor, or maybe I want to code and build something to see something. But we ask them to just hold on and kind of do these exercises. And specifically at this point is when they start to realize, you know what, I think I never thought about it from this angle. And earlier I was just going to do this, but now that I think of it, if my user is like this, I should have maybe a different path for them, right? Or maybe I should have like my entire conversation changes, my entire idea of a skill changes, right? So that is a very important thing to do in the skill ideation life cycle as such. Now, after this is we kind of get very close to the point where we say that, hey, what you should do at this point is kind of start scripting it out, okay? And I've built a lot of skills, and what I do with these with any skills that I build is I start to write like a script in there, and I say that, hey, this is what the person is going to do, and I don't need to necessarily start doing each and every conversation. But what we kind of start doing is we start to write the script, and hey, this is my happy path. And what I mean by happy path is, how do I get, so right from the point when the user says, open my skill, to the point they get to their gratification, what is the best case scenario going to look like? Assuming they didn't do anything wrong, they didn't say anything wrong, and my skill worked perfectly, right? So what is going to be my best case scenario? What is going to be my happy path? Now, traditionally, a lot of this, people start to think of, flow charting whenever they kind of have an idea in their mind that, hey, this is what the user is going to say. But it's going to be so difficult when you try to build a skill in a flowchart. And I've seen a lot of complex skills being built on flowcharts. Let me just say that it was not a pleasant sight to look at that flowchart, right? It's so messy because, say for example, a very simple thing like in the script, if you say what time of the day is it, and the person says it's lunchtime. So if someone says it's lunchtime, okay, maybe you can create a decision model for them. If someone says breakfast, fine. But if someone says something like, I'm treating my girlfriend, right? Now that is a totally different situation that you're not at all ready for, right? And you can typically have, people can say just anything and everything. You can just have so many different flow charts, but it's just going to be very difficult to keep track of.
Yeah, it's like,
which is where situational.
No, I was going to say it's like every box in the flow chart could connect to every other box, like because,
exactly, right?
It just becomes a mess.
Right, and pretty much at the end of the day, you're staring, hey, where was the start going to be from?
That's
right? Oh, that is the start, right?
Yeah.
And so our idea is that always start scripting it out, and always build the simplest version first. And one of the important things to do there is to read it out. And this is very important, because when you kind of start to read out, uh, what the dialogue looks like, uh, you really start to empathize with the user, right? And we do a very fun activity. Usually, we kind of pair this up with two people in the team, right? And we get one person to act like Alexa and one person to act like the user. And when they start to do that, and these are usually people who just came in and met each other, or they are good friends. But when they have to start presenting a dialogue in front of some people, and they just start to have these small issues with each other, they say that, hey, now it's your turn to speak, and that person is like, now your turn to speak, right? And that is what would also that is something that is not going to happen when you're kind of doing it with a computer, right? The computer knows when you are going to be speaking, right? And so that's when you kind of start to realize the power of this dialogue is, okay, you know what, I was maybe not that clear enough, that the opposite person did not understand that it was their time to speak out, right?
This is such a simple, but from the skills that I've worked on, the most effective way to plan the dialogue part of a skill, or the conversational part of a skill, is just to role play it with somebody else. It's easy to do, but it, to your point, will really show you quickly whether or not you need to spend more time thinking through the dialogue.
Exactly, right. And the last, and which brings me to the last point. Like we had one of these workshops where a person was building a fitness skill, and there was a team of two people, and that person who came to demo their skill idea, they were talking about it, and the person who was acting as Alexa was like, okay, your next task is to do 25 push-ups, and the other person who was acting as the user actually started doing 25 push-ups, right? And neither the person who was acting as Alexa knew that the person is going to do. And that's what is sometimes going to happen, that there's going to be a unexpected response from the user's end as well, and you need to handle it properly, right? Alexa, stop. Right. I think that is one of the most important things, to make sure that your skill is prepared for anything unexpected. Like at this point, if the user has not responded, say something like, hey, I think you are exercising right now, so I'll play a music for you to exercise, stuff like that. So I think those are the kind of things that we kind of start doing in this exercise. We kind of start, and it's not like you need to do it as a one-time experience. You have to keep doing it, refining it again and again, and keep looking at users' data. Once you even give a skill out there, you need to keep looking at what are they saying, how are they kind of dealing with all of these options, and do a lot of beta testing and figure out that, hey, you know what, a lot of people are coming in, but they are not saying it like this. So maybe there's something wrong with these kind of discussions that I'm having. So maybe I need to kind of look at doing this in a better way.
Yeah, this is super valuable.
Right, and this is one of the things that we also do, right? Where we kind of ask everyone to find out synonyms and disruptors, right? And synonyms are where different ways the user might say the same thing, and the disruptor is when the user responds with an unexpected question or phrase, right? And this is one of the most important thing, where we tell them that, hey, you underline synonyms, and you point it out properly in your script, what are going to be synonyms and what are going to be disruptors. But one of the concerns that always comes is, at this point, everyone has warmed up to the idea of building a really good skill, right? And they start to put in their own ideas of, hey, this is what I want my skill to do. And what I usually tell them is that by default, your skill doesn't have like a multiple generation of cultural experience, right? Uh, you as a kid, your ancestors, like, as humanity, we have come across such a long way. We have the multiple generation of cultural experience on how to behave, what to say, what not to say, right? Your skill doesn't, right? So the way we do kind of do is we kind of say that at this point, maybe what you should do is circle anything that you think you can get without asking the user, and you can underline anything that you must ask the user for. Like, there's no other better source except asking the user for, right? So, and at the same time, just keep this in mind that don't expect your skill to be like top notch from day one. Like, you launch it and it's going to be really great. And I've been trying to build an Alexa game skill on my Twitch stream. And initially, I always have that optimism when I'm starting to build a skill that, hey, this is going to be the best skill. But as I go ahead, I'm like, okay, you know what? I think I should just get this to the certification with the bare minimum and kind of reiterate on how users are going to behave with this skill, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something. So, like, say for example, so information you can get without asking the user for, that is circling, right? Like Seattle and Washington for this example, right? This is something that you can get from the customer profile API, find out their locations and stuff like that. But whether the user wants to cook, go out, or eat in, these are things that you don't know. So this is something that only the user would be able to do it. So it's just better to underline that, because that's something that that's something that only the user would be able to give you. And what we kind of do is kind of get all these synonyms and disruptors together and just make sure that, hey, I think this is a synonym and this is how I want to kind of handle it. And this is a disruptor. And for this disruptor, I think what's going to happen is maybe I'll have a different path for this. Now, once you kind of have all of these things, right, we kind of ask them to do the synonyms and disruptors and all those things. And by the time this first time script that people came up with, we ask people to write it out on a paper, we kind of highlight them. What happens literally by the end of this session is they got a full script, which is really messy, right? And that's perfectly fine. That's all. That is the nature of conversations, right? Conversations can be messy. Conversations can go in different way. But the most important thing is that you kind of taken a step on disassociating yourself from how basic apps are built and think of a voice first experience for users, right? And I think that's where we wrap up and we talk about saying that, hey, you know what, now that you've got the script and you've got your happy path and you've got your synonyms and disruptors, this is where you kind of start to do the situational design. And while we won't talk about situational design, but this is where you kind of get all the situational design cards and you kind of start putting in all those cards appropriately, and then say that, okay, now you know what, I'm going to take this entire card and I'm going to code this, right? So that's the point we take everyone to before you actually start writing a single line of code. And this is something that has worked for me, and this is something that we do at Amazon. And as skill builders, we highly recommend doing these kind of exercises. Take you to, and of course on a regular basis, takes you to that point where you can really deliver compelling experience to your users.
So circle data that you could get without asking the user, and underline data that you have to prompt the user for.
Exactly. That is one of the important things to do.
Got it.
And when they kind of start to do that, they think that, hey, and that's when they kind of start to think about it. Hey, do I really need to ask the user this, right? And those are the kind of things that starts to come into their mind when they start to do these kind of exercises. And circle, underline, and like I marked, synonyms and disruptors. Highlight this as synonym and highlight this as disruptors. When they start doing that, that's when they start to realize that, hey, do I really need this? Is this something that the user is going to say? Or how should I handle these kind of conversations?
What are your thoughts, Karthik, around so like it's lunch circled? We could get that from the profile API, right? Sort of find out what time zone they're in and assume like what time of day it is. But we'd have to ask them to enable permissions for that. Do you feel like that creates more friction in like just asking them for the time, one time? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question. See, what happens is, yes, like I said, this all goes back to where you are identifying your user, right? So, for example, if it's a user who is like Sanjay, who is like 22 years old, fairly well versed with mobile phones, right? And they are speaking to the device and they say that, hey, okay, permissions, let me go into the app and just quickly grant the skill the permissions, right? It's a no-brainer for them. But if that was the same skill that say someone older in the house was using, they would be like, okay, which mobile phone do I go to? What is this talking about? What card is it going to talk about? So I think a lot of this depends on what the user is going to say. And that's where we kind of have a path that if the user does not give them the permissions, we say that, hey, you know what? Just give me the answer itself, right? You tell me the answer, right? And that's what we are doing here. We say that, hey, if you would like me to recommend these, go and do this on the app. But if not, just tell me right now and I'll find the lunch for you. Right?
That was one of the earlier tenets, right? Let the user be in control of the conversation. So if they want to skip, they can do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Good stuff. I'm thinking of all the changes I have to make on some of the skills that I've worked on.
Yeah, and I, like I said, right, this is not a one-time experience that you need to do. Building a great experience at the end of the day means that you need to come back to your script and your conversation model and keep looking at how can you get, and this is one thing that I feel I would leave as a parting thought is right from the time when someone says open the skill, how can you get someone to the gratification, get them to their gratification pretty quick, right? Like for example, when I go to a pizza shop and I say something, I get a pizza pretty instantly, right? So that's where my gratification is happening in that conversation, right? So we need to kind of think of that when you're kind of building a skill, and the happy path is the most important thing to get it right. So that means every time the first time the user comes into the skill, they should have a very flawless path which takes them from like step one, opening the skill, to their gratification, which actually makes them come back and say that, hey, you know what, I really like this skill. I found this skill the last time. I'm going to use this again and again. Right? And a lot of that banks on getting that happy path proper.
Yeah, this is great. And in like you mentioned when we started, there's a course that goes along with this, right? So somebody watching this that goes through and gets to the point where they've scripted out their happy path. The next step would be to head over to alexa.design/CDW, and I'll leave that link in the notes also for the video, the description for the video. Yeah, this is awesome, Karthik. I really appreciate you taking the time out to share it. And how about your Twitch channel and all of that? How do we connect with you after this video?
So I'm P Karthik R on everywhere on the internet. So twitch.tv/P Karthik R or twitter.com/P Karthik R. Always eager to hear from people who are building some great experiences on voice, and looking forward to talking to more people through this. Thanks, Steve.
No, thank you. This was super valuable information, and I really appreciate you spending the time. And with that, we'll say thank you to everybody watching. And if you've got questions or comments, you can leave those, and I will respond just as quickly as possible. And head over to alexa.design/CDW to pick it up from here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.